Serpent Power. In Exodus 7 verses 8 to 13, Moses and Aaron are commanded by God to perform a miracle before Pharaoh. Their staffs turn into snakes in front of the royal palace. Interestingly, the Egyptian magicians, called Hartamim in Hebrew, are also able to imitate this feat with their own tools and techniques. In ancient Egyptian culture, the practice of transforming inanimate objects into living creatures was associated with Heka, the sacred magic taught in the schools of priests. Heka was not simply magic in the modern sense, but was seen as a fundamental force that maintained the order of the cosmos and gave humans the ability to manipulate reality. In many Egyptian texts, such as the Westcar Papyrus, the ability of Egyptian magicians to create animals from inanimate objects in rituals of power is recorded. Since Moses was raised as the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter, Exodus 2 verse 10, it is highly likely that he had access to the education of the Egyptian elite, including instruction in the art of Heka. This evidence is reinforced by how naturally Moses used his staff in many of his subsequent miracles, such as parting the sea or summoning plagues, showing that the staff was not merely a physical tool for him, but also a medium of supernatural power, exactly like the Egyptian concept of the scepter. In this context, Moses' staff battle against the Egyptian magicians was not merely a contest of magic, but a demonstration of a magical duel between two equally powerful ritual forces. The fact that Moses' snake swallowed the magician's snakes was interpreted as the superiority of his supernatural knowledge over the powers of ancient Egypt. Plague rituals. The 10 plagues of Egypt recounted in Exodus 7 through 12 were not just a series of ordinary disasters. In many studies, it has been found that the pattern of these disasters closely resembles the structure of curse rituals in ancient Egyptian magic. Egyptian priests, especially in the Heka tradition, had curse texts known as execration texts, rituals for summoning disaster to bring down enemies by destroying dolls, writing the enemy's name, and cursing them through specific prayers. These rituals often resulted in disease, natural destruction, and even the death of children. The 10 plagues of Moses, water turning to blood, frog infestations, lice, flies, livestock disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the death of firstborn sons, mirror nearly all elements of the execration texts aimed at destroying Egypt's political or spiritual enemies. More strikingly, the stages of the plagues were not random. They escalated systematically from minor disturbances to massive destruction, exactly like the instructions in ancient Egyptian tiered curse rituals. How did Moses know how to execute these plagues? He was raised in the palace where the use of Heka and rituals of power transfer were taught to the select elite. If Moses had ever received initiation, whether intentionally or not, he would have understood that layered curses were the primary method for breaking the will of a king or a particular god in Egyptian belief. This makes the plagues not merely God's punishment, but a systematic ritual strategy of destruction, and demonstrates Moses' knowledge of Egyptian magic to be deeper than mere ordinary miracles. Pharaoh's secrets. In Exodus 2 verse 10, it is mentioned that Moses was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter and raised as an Egyptian nobleman. Jewish tradition in the Midrash and Flavius Josephus' history reinforce this story by saying that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of Egypt. This means that he not only learned to read and write hieroglyphics, but was also taught mathematics, astronomy, law, military strategy, and most importantly, Heka or ritual magic. In Moses' time, around the 15th century BC, according to tradition, the education of the nobility in the Egyptian palace was not only about government and administration, but also involved esoteric learning. Priests in temples such as Heliopolis and Memphis educated the future elite in the secrets of cosmology, the power of sacred names, the use of symbols, and rituals for controlling natural forces. Since Egypt viewed Heka as a legal power for governing the world, teaching magic to princes was not taboo. It was standard for future leaders. As a royal ward, Moses likely received full training in this field. Many theories even suggest that his understanding of the secret name of God, which he claimed to have received in the burning bush, was a form of ancient knowledge about the power of divine names, much like the Egyptian tradition of the secret names of the gods. This makes Moses not merely a messenger of revelation, but a figure with a strong foundation in the most advanced magical and metaphysical structures of his time. With this background, many of the miracles performed by Moses can be seen as manifestations of ancient knowledge that he had systematically studied in the hidden educational system of the Egyptian palace. elemental command, and one of Moses' most spectacular actions was parting the Red Sea, Exodus 14 verses 21 to 22. In the narrative, Moses raised his staff and a strong east wind split the sea, creating a dry path for the Israelites. For many modern readers, this is considered a divine miracle. However, in the context of ancient Egypt, the ability to manipulate natural elements, such as water, wind, or weather, was an integral part of the science of Heka. In various Egyptian magical texts, such as the Book of the Heavenly Cow and the Pyramid texts, there are spells and rituals aimed at controlling the Nile River, summoning storms, or calming the seas. High-ranking Egyptian priests learned these methods through a combination of prayers, symbolic gestures such as raising a staff or hands, and the use of sacred names of nature gods such as Hapi, god of the Nile River, or Shu, god of air. With an understanding of such rituals, manipulating weather or water conditions was not foreign within the religious and magical framework of Egypt. Since Moses was raised in an environment familiar with these techniques, it is highly likely that he understood the basic structure of how to control natural elements through a combination of gestures, sounds, and divine names. This explains why Moses' commands, such as summoning hail, locusts, or total darkness, followed a ritual pattern of natural control, similar to Egyptian traditions. By parting the Red Sea with his staff, Moses was not merely acting as God's messenger, but also functioning as a master of the elements, a role characteristic of the great magicians in the Heka tradition. This reinforces the notion that his knowledge of natural manipulation was not a coincidence, but rather the result of advanced occult education in ancient Egypt. Divine name. In ancient Egyptian tradition, knowing someone's secret name, especially that of a god, meant having power over that entity. One of the most important texts, the legend of Ra and Isis, describes how the goddess Isis gained control over the god Ra by stealing his true name. In the Heka system, names are power. They are not mere labels, but the essence of spiritual power. A similar occurrence is reflected in the story of Moses at the burning bush, Exodus 3 verses 13 to 15. When Moses asked God, "What is your name?" and God replied, "I am who I am," this was more than a philosophical answer. In the ancient context, it was a revelation of the divine name, meaning that Moses was granted direct access to God's power. This name then became the basis of Moses' authority to perform miracles, curse Egypt, and lead Israel. This practice is very similar to the method of Heka, in which priests or sorcerers who knew the true name of a power could command it. An Egyptian Heka priest would engrave sacred names on amulets or recite them in ritual prayers to control gods, spirits, or even elements of nature. Moses' ability to act in the name of God was not merely an ethical representation, but also a ritualistic, magical one. Within Egyptian cultural context, obtaining the name of a divine power made Moses a kind of hierophant, a direct intermediary between the human world and supernatural forces. This is not a common pattern in other ancient narratives, except among individuals who mastered the secrets of high-level magic. Therefore, Moses' ability to perform miracles through his mastery of divine names reveals strong traces of education and understanding of Egyptian esoteric traditions. Nile curse. One of the first plagues Moses brought upon Egypt was turning all the water in the Nile River into blood, Exodus 7 verses 17 through 21. This was not merely a visual miracle. In ancient Egyptian tradition, water, especially the Nile, was a symbol of life, and manipulation of it was considered an act of supreme magical power. On the other hand, transmutation, the transformation of substances, was a highly revered technique in the Egyptian Heka tradition and early alchemical practices. In the Ebers Papyrus and the Leiden X Papyrus, there are records of rituals aimed at transforming substances, such as making water appear like blood for the purpose of exorcising evil spirits or as a symbol of destruction. This process involved the use of natural dyes, such as red ochre or hematite, that were magically programmed through incantations to enhance their spiritual effects. These rituals were believed to not only alter the physical appearance, but also the metaphysical essence of water. Given Moses' background in the Egyptian court, it is highly likely that he understood the basic aspects of this ritual transmutation. Whether in its tangible form, using natural substances, or in its metaphysical form, using the power of names and commands, the ability to turn water into blood was part of the expertise of a sorcerer in Egypt. Furthermore, blood in ancient Egyptian culture symbolized chaos and death, two elements viewed as serious threats to Ma'at, cosmic order. By turning the Nile into blood, Moses not only created a visually terrifying event, but also symbolically declared that Egyptian order had been destroyed. This was a direct blow to the spiritual foundation of the kingdom, a method characteristic of high-level magical warfare in the ancient world. Sorcerer's staff. In various ancient Egyptian texts, the staff or rod was not merely a walking aid, but a symbol of supernatural authority. One of the most famous artifacts is the was scepter, a long rod with an animal head at one end and a fork at the other, which symbolized the magical and earthly power of gods and kings. Whoever held this staff was believed to have the right to rule over humans and spirits. When in the book of Exodus, Moses carried a staff that could change shape, summon plagues, part the sea, and bring water from a rock, it was consistent with the function of the magic staff in Egyptian tradition. In the pyramid texts and coffin texts, it is recorded that the gods used staffs to control the forces of nature, neutralize enemies, or open the doors to the spirit dimension. It is likely that Moses, who was raised in Pharaoh's palace, understood that the power of a leader, both politically and spiritually in Egypt, was centered on the symbolism of the sacred staff. Egyptian tradition even had a special ritual to purify the staff so that it could become a conduit for the power of a particular god through incantations and sacred water ceremonies, wab purification. In this context, Moses' staff was not just an ordinary wooden staff. It became an extension of divine power, similar to the staffs carried by the high priests of Egypt when leading major religious rituals. It is no wonder that in key events, such as the duel in Pharaoh's palace, the parting of the Red Sea, and the provision of water in the desert, Moses always relied on his staff to perform miracles. His skill in using the staff as a ritual tool shows that Moses applied highly structured Egyptian occult techniques in his actions. Storm darkness. One of the hallmarks of Moses' actions was his ability to command nature, calling down hail, bringing locusts in great numbers, creating total darkness, and dramatically changing the weather. Exodus 9-10. In ancient Egypt, such actions were known as Heka nature manipulation, the control of the elements through a combination of incantations, ritual gestures, and the power of sacred names. In the Bremner-Rand Papyrus and the Harris Papyrus, rituals are recorded in which Egyptian priests used incantations to summon storms, stop floods, or protect the land from locust swarms. All of these involved verbal commands in the name of a god associated with a particular element such as Tefnut for water, Set for storms, or Khepri for insect cycles. What made these rituals powerful was the belief that natural elements were not neutral entities but spiritual beings that could be directed. In this context, Moses' actions were not simply because God did it, but because he himself understood the patterns of magical commands similar to the Heka system, making declarations before nature using ritual gestures, raising a staff pointing to the sky, striking the ground, and then activating cosmic changes. Furthermore, when Moses commanded 3 days of darkness, Exodus 10 verses 21 through 23, it referenced one of the main fears of Egyptian society, the defeat of Ra, the sun god. Blocking out the light meant breaking the spiritual structure of Egypt. This was a form of high-level occult attack, exactly as taught in the practice of destructive Heka. Thus, Moses' ability to move natural forces in accordance with Egyptian magical structures was not merely a spontaneous miracle, it demonstrated a systematic understanding of elemental manipulation rituals that could only be gained through advanced occult education. Angel death, the 10th plague, the death of all the firstborn sons of Egypt, Exodus 11-12, was the culmination of Moses' spiritual attack on Egypt, and was very similar to the ritual of summoning death, Heka of destruction, in ancient Egyptian tradition. In texts such as the Book of the Dead and the Pyramid texts, there are references to incantations invoking the forces of death to destroy enemies or end a person's life. In Egyptian practice, priests performed nighttime rituals involving prayers, invoking the spirits of darkness, often associated with death gods like Anubis or Seth, and blood symbolism to open the way for the forces of death to attack a specific target. The death of the firstborn in Egyptian culture was the ultimate blow, as the firstborn was the spiritual and political heir of the family. Moses, according to the story of Exodus, instructed the Israelites to perform the Passover ritual. slaughter a lamb, smear its blood on the doorposts, and hide inside their homes overnight. This closely resembles the apotropaic rituals of warding off evil in Egypt, where blood was used to protect homes from the spirits of the dead roaming at night. The fact that Moses knew of the need for blood protection before calling down this disaster demonstrates his mastery of the dual magical principle, summoning destructive forces while simultaneously creating a protective shield for a specific group, a highly sophisticated technique in the tradition of Heka. This was not a reckless act, but a highly sophisticated ritual that could only have been performed by someone who understood exactly how to direct the forces of spiritual darkness with precision. This ritual shows that Moses was not just a prophet, but a skilled practitioner of dark summoning techniques comparable to the great sorcerers of Egypt. Heavenly tablets. In Exodus 19-20, it is recounted that Moses ascended Mount Sinai and received the tablets of the law, 2 stone tablets inscribed with the 10 commandments, directly from the hand of God, amid lightning, smoke, and the sound of heavenly trumpets. This was more than just a religious event. In ancient tradition, the reception of laws or sacred texts after a peak ritual was characteristic of high-level occult initiation. In the ancient Egyptian world, high priests experienced a symbolic ascent to the sacred mountain in temple initiation rituals, known as the Mysterium Initiationis. At this stage, the candidate was taken to a hidden sacred place where he received revelation in the form of texts, laws, or sacred names directly from the god. For example, in the Heliopolitan tradition, there was a ceremony in which the priest received the laws of the sun after experiencing phenomenal events such as sacred fire or thunder from the sky, symbols of divine presence. Moses, with his Egyptian educational background, was clearly familiar with this concept. The depiction of Sinai in the text of Exodus has many parallels with the ritual structure of Egyptian temples: a sacred zone, thick clouds, sacred incense smoke, divine voices, ritual music, and the handing over of sacred texts. More profoundly, in the ancient occult world, tablets from the sky symbolized that the individual had become an official mediator between the human world and cosmic forces. The laws received were not only moral rules, but also served as a contract of power, marking Moses as a spiritual and worldly leader with heavenly authority. The reception of these tablets within the framework of ancient culture is the climax of a ritual-filled spiritual journey. It shows that Moses underwent an initiation process similar to that of the high priests of Egypt before emerging as the bearer of divine law.